NATO just unleashed something Russia never saw coming. For years, Moscow believed its rear areas deep inside its own territory were untouchable sanctuaries. They were wrong. In the span of just the last 10 days, Ukrainian forces armed with newly unrestricted Western long-range missiles have conducted over 24 precision strikes hundreds of kilometers inside Russia. Ammunition depots, airfields, command centers, gone, not damaged, not degraded, effectively neutralized in critical sectors. This isn't scattered harassment. This is a systematic dismantling of the logistical backbone that has kept Russian offensives alive. By the time we are done, you will understand exactly how this changes the entire character of the war. Welcome to States News. If this is your first time here, subscribe and turn on notifications because we deliver the kind of unfiltered, technically precise analysis the mainstream outlets simply will not touch. We cut through the noise. We connect the dots. And we do it with the numbers, the maps, and the doctrine that actually matter. I am going to show you exactly why NATO's decision to lift every restriction on long-range Western weapons has just handed Ukraine a genuine game-changer. We will examine the specific policy shift that happened behind closed doors in Washington, London, and Brussels. We will break down the technical capabilities of the ATACMS and Storm Shadow systems now operating deep inside Russia. We will map the tactical destruction already visible in satellite imagery and Ukrainian strike footage. We will trace the strategic pressure building on Russian supply lines, air operations, and command nodes. And by the end, you will understand why this single move has the potential to reshape the battlefield from the Donbass all the way to the Kremlin's war cabinet. The war in Ukraine is about to change. Stay with me. To understand why this matters, we need to step back and see the strategic context that made Russia's rear areas feel so safe for so long. For more than 3 years, the conflict had settled into a grinding war of attrition. Russian forces relied on a vast network of rear-area sanctuaries, airfields like Engels and Diaghilevo, ammunition hubs in Voronezh and Belgorod oblasts, rail junctions feeding the front lines from Rostov to Kursk. These targets sat 200 to 400 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. Ukrainian forces could hit some of them with domestic drones, but the really deep, high-value nodes remained largely off-limits. Why? Because Western partners had imposed strict rules of engagement. ATACMS and Storm Shadow missiles could only be used against targets inside occupied Ukrainian territory. The fear in Washington and European capitals was escalation, Russian retaliation, perhaps even nuclear saber-rattling. Moscow counted on that hesitation. It shaped their entire logistics doctrine. They parked strategic bombers, stored millions of artillery shells, and staged command posts in what they treated as a protected rear. That illusion just evaporated. Let us talk about the key actors here. On the Ukrainian side, President Zelensky and the General Staff have been pleading for this capability since the first months of the full-scale invasion. They understood that without the ability to strike deep, they were fighting with one hand tied behind their back. Ukraine possesses skilled operators, excellent Western-trained pilots now flying F-16s, and a network of HIMARS launchers that have already proven devastating at shorter ranges. What they lacked was permission and the full suite of long-range munitions. On the Russian side, Vladimir Putin built his strategy around the assumption that NATO would never cross that red line. Russian military doctrine still emphasizes mass artillery, mass drones, mass manpower. Their rear areas were the arteries. Cut those arteries and the entire offensive machine seizes up. Russian air defenses, the S-400 batteries and Pantsir systems, were positioned to protect those deep targets, but they were never tested against the volume and sophistication of coordinated Western cruise missile salvos, guided by NATO intelligence. NATO itself is not a monolith, but the decision emerged from a quiet consensus among the United States, Britain, France, and supporting allies. According to multiple reports from Reuters and the Washington Post citing Western officials, the policy review concluded in late 2025 that the risk of escalation had been overstated, while the cost of Ukrainian attrition had become unsustainable. The baseline facts on the ground reinforced that conclusion. Russian forces were still advancing, slowly, at enormous cost, sometimes 100-200 casualties a day, according to Ukrainian and Western estimates. Ukrainian forces were holding but bleeding. The front lines around Pokrovsk and Vuhledar had become meat grinders. Something had to shift the correlation of forces. That something arrived 10 days ago, when the restrictions vanished. Now we move to the heart of the matter, the progressive layers of what this actually means on the battlefield. Layer 1, the development itself, and the first wave of strikes. Ukrainian forces did not wait for press conferences. Within hours of the policy green light, HIMARS crews in eastern Ukraine began loading ATACMS Block IA missiles. These are not simple rockets. The MGM-140 Army Tactical Missile System carries a 500-pound unitary warhead or a payload of 300 M74 submunitions, guided by GPS and inertial navigation, with a range exceeding 300 kilometers. At the same time, Ukrainian Su-24s and newly arrived F-16s took off with Storm Shadow cruise missiles, air-launched, stealthy, 250-kilometer-plus range, each packing a 450-kilogram Broach warhead, specifically engineered to penetrate hardened bunkers before detonating. The first targets were not random. Satellite imagery released by Maxar Technologies and analyzed by open-source intelligence accounts showed precise hits on the ammunition depot at Milarovo Airfield in Rostov Oblast, over 250 kilometers from the front. Secondary explosions lit up the night sky for hours. A second strike hit the rail hub at Veluiki in Belgorod Oblast, severing a primary supply artery. Russian Ministry of Defense footage tried to claim minor damage. Independent verification from local residents and geolocated drone videos told a different story. Those facilities are offline. Tactical significance is immediate and brutal. Russian forces on the front lines depend on a just-in-time logistics model. Artillery shells do not teleport to the guns. They move by rail, then by truck from those deep depots. One destroyed depot at Milarovo represented weeks of 152mm ammunition for multiple brigades. When those shells stop arriving, the Russian barrage that has defined their defensive and offensive operations simply runs dry. Ukrainian troops report measurable drops in incoming fire within 48 hours of the strikes. That is not speculation. That is battlefield telemetry. Strategic implications go deeper. Russia's Air Force, already strained, now faces a new calculus. Strategic bombers at Engels Airfield, home to Tu-95 and Tu-160 platforms that launch glide bombs and cruise missiles against Ukrainian cities, can no longer assume immunity. A Storm Shadow salvo can reach Engels. Ukrainian operators know the exact coordinates of hardened aircraft shelters. One well-placed hit does not just destroy an aircraft, it forces Russia to disperse its entire strategic aviation fleet, reducing sortie rates and complicating command and control. Second-order effects are already rippling outward. Russian air defense systems are being pulled from the front to protect rear areas. S-400 batteries that once covered advancing columns in Donetsk are now repositioned hundreds of kilometers back. That creates gaps Ukrainian drones and smaller munitions can exploit. Russian logistics officers are now forced to move supplies at night in smaller convoys on secondary roads. Fuel consumption spikes. Maintenance backlogs grow. Morale among rear-echelon troops, long shielded from the war, begins to crack as explosions echo through what used to be safe territory. Layer 2. The technical deep dive into the weapons themselves. Let us be precise. The ATACMS is not a new system, but its employment at this scale and depth is revolutionary. Each missile costs roughly $1.2 million, but the damage-to-cost ratio is extraordinary. A single ATACMS can blanket an airfield with submunitions, cratering runways, and destroying aircraft in the open. The Storm Shadow, developed jointly by Britain and France, adds a different capability. Its Broach warhead uses a shaped charge precursor to punch through concrete, followed by a main charge that detonates inside the structure. It is the perfect tool against command bunkers and ammunition storage. Both systems feed on NATO-provided targeting data, real-time satellite imagery, signals intelligence, drone feeds. Ukrainian operators do not guess. They strike with coordinates accurate to within meters. We have seen this precision before in shorter-range strikes, but never at this depth. The combination of Western intelligence and Ukrainian execution creates a kill chain Russia cannot easily break. Their electronic warfare systems struggle against the low observable profiles of these missiles. Their radar networks are optimized for shorter threats. The result is a sudden asymmetric advantage that no amount of Russian mass can immediately offset. Layer 3. The pressure on Russian command and economic foundations. Every destroyed rail junction forces Moscow to reroute supplies through longer, more vulnerable paths. The Kerch Bridge, already hit multiple times, is no longer the only choke point. Inland routes through Rostov and Kursk are now under threat. Russian defense industry factories in Tula and Lipetsk oblasts, hundreds of kilometers from the border, must now divert resources to local protection. That slows production of the very artillery shells and glide bombs Putin needs to sustain the front. Economically, the war was already costing Russia 6 to 8% of GDP, according to independent estimates from the Kyiv School of Economics. These strikes accelerate the bleed. Insurance rates for Russian-flagged vessels spike. Foreign investors, already nervous, see fresh evidence that no part of the country is truly safe. Geopolitically, this forces every actor to recalculate. China watches closely. Beijing does not want a precedent of successful deep strikes against a nuclear power. North Korea and Iran, Russia's munition suppliers, see their supply lines potentially threatened if escalation continues. Inside NATO, the decision has unified the alliance in a way sanctions never could. Even previously cautious members now see the logic. Limited, proportional strikes that degrade Russian warfighting capacity without direct NATO involvement remain below the nuclear threshold. Layer 4, the human and morale dimension. Russian soldiers at the front are already exhausted. News of strikes in their hometowns, Belgorod, Kursk, even Bryansk, travels fast via telegram channels and smuggled phones. When a father in Voronezh learns the ammunition plant that employed his brother just went up in smoke, the narrative that the war is far away collapses. Mobilization resistance, already simmering, gains fresh oxygen. Ukrainian forces, by contrast, receive a surge of confidence. They are no longer simply defending, they are dictating terms. Layer 5. The broader power dynamics. This move signals to the world that NATO is willing to adjust its risk calculus when the alternative is Ukrainian collapse. It undercuts the Russian narrative of inevitable victory through attrition. It creates the possibility, still distant but now visible, of a battlefield stalemate shifting toward Ukrainian advantage. Russia can still win a war of exhaustion, but the cost just skyrocketed. Putin's war cabinet must now choose between escalation, which risks direct NATO involvement, or de-escalation, which looks like weakness. That is the progressive picture. Tactical destruction, strategic paralysis, second-order economic pressure, geopolitical realignment. Each layer builds on the last. Each strike compounds the effect. Of course, no analysis is complete without acknowledging the complications and limitations. These missiles are expensive and available in finite numbers. Ukraine does not have thousands of ATACMS or Storm Shadows. Western stocks are not unlimited. Russia will adapt. They are already dispersing assets, hardening shelters, and rushing additional air defense systems eastward. Electronic warfare improvements could eventually raise the intercept rate. Escalation risks remain real. Putin has already threatened asymmetric responses, though so far those threats have remained rhetorical. Some analysts in Europe and even parts of Washington argue this prolongs the conflict rather than ending it, that it hardens Russian resolve and makes negotiations harder. Others point out that without sustained Western resupply, Ukraine could exhaust its new capability within months, returning the initiative to Moscow. Those are fair points. The fog of war is thick. Satellite imagery confirms the strikes, but full battle damage assessment takes time. Russian claims of total intercepts are propaganda, yet some missiles have been shot down. The war remains brutal, expensive, and uncertain. This is not a Hollywood ending. It is a hard, incremental shift in momentum that still requires Ukrainian courage, Western commitment, and time. Here is the synthesis. NATO did not hand Ukraine a magic wand. They handed Ukraine a scalpel capable of cutting the arteries that feed the Russian war machine. The strikes of the last 10 days are proof of concept. The logistical sanctuaries are gone. The air bases are vulnerable. The command nodes are under pressure. Russia can still fight. Mass and geography give them staying power. But the cost curve has bent sharply against them. Ukrainian forces now operate with a reach that matches their operational skill. That combination changes the math on every front line from Kharkiv to Zaporizhzhia. Looking forward, the next 3 to 6 months will be decisive. If Western production ramps up to match the new mission, if Ukraine integrates these strikes with ground offensives and drone campaigns, the pressure on Moscow could become unsustainable. We may see Russian withdrawals from exposed salients simply to shorten supply lines. We may see renewed diplomatic feelers from the Kremlin once the economic pain becomes politically untenable. Or we may see a desperate escalation attempt that NATO has already signaled it is prepared to meet. Whatever path Russia chooses, the era of safe rear areas is over. This is why we do this work at States News. Not to cheerlead, not to spread fear, To give you the unvarnished, technically grounded truth, so you can see the strategic reality others miss. The war in Ukraine just entered a new phase. The game has changed. The next moves will determine whether this becomes the beginning of the end or simply another bloody chapter. If you want to stay ahead of those moves, hit subscribe, turn on notifications. We will be here with the next update as soon as fresh imagery and verified reports come in. Because in this conflict, information is ammunition, and we intend to keep you armed with the best of it. Until then, stay informed, stay skeptical, and remember, the map is not the territory, but the strikes we just witnessed are rewriting it in real time. This is States News. We will see you in the next briefing.